I didn't cry at the reading of the will. But when my husband smiled, that's when I knew I was alone. The room smelled like cedar and old paper. The kind of scent that makes you sit up straighter, like your father might walk in any moment and expect you to act right. Mr. Flanagan's office hadn't changed in 20 years. Same stained glass window, same soft ticking clock on the wall. But this time my father wasn't sitting beside me with his hand over mine. He was ash in an urn on a mantel, and I was here to learn what came next. Jillian Rowe, Mr. Flanagan began, his voice careful, smooth, as if he'd practiced this on the ride over. Per your father's instructions, you are to receive the entirety of the Rowe estate, including all assets, properties, holdings, and his controlling interest in Rowe Meridian. I nodded once. Not out of greed. Not even surprise. I just knew. Dad had hinted at this years ago. Never directly, but in the way he'd make me sit in on meetings. In the way he stopped asking my mother for her opinion long before she left. Beside me, Michael shifted. I felt his hand rest on my knee, gentle, almost reassuring. Then I saw it. He leaned forward slightly as Mr. Flanagan pushed the folder across the desk. Michael's eyes followed it. Not me. The file. He didn't even realize he did it. I folded my hands in my lap and said nothing. On the way home, the rain clung to the windshield in soft vertical threads, like the city was trying to weep for me. Michael kept the radio low. Jazz. The kind my father used to play when working late in his study. You okay? Michael asked as he pulled into the driveway. I'm fine, I said. That evening, I laid the documents out on the coffee table, a quiet ritual the way one might arrange old photographs after a funeral. Our house was still, no music, no fire. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the hush of inherited silence. Michael poured us each a glass of Cabernet and sank into the couch beside me. I forgot about the Aspen house, he said, swirling his wine. We should take a trip this winter. Get away. Reset. I nodded, half listening. He reached for one of the pages, then paused. Maybe update it, make it more modern. You know how drafty those old homes can be. Then, too casually. And of course we'll figure out what to give Mom. Half seems fair. My glass stopped halfway to my lips. Half, I repeated. He smiled like I'd just misheard him. She practically raised you while your dad was out chasing mergers and buying islands. I mean, she was always there. It's only right. I laughed. But it came out wrong. It wasn't amused, it was sharp, hollow. Michael didn't flinch. He just looked at me, calm, still calculating in a way that made my skin cool under my sweater. Not angry. Just watching. I stood and began collecting the pages methodically, carefully. Like they were glass. I stacked them back into the folder, placed it under my arm, and headed upstairs. That night, I tucked the envelope beneath my pillow. Not because I needed to read it again. I knew what it said. But somehow it felt like my father might still be watching, not from heaven, not from memory, but from the paper, from the ink, from the truth he'd left behind. Michael fell asleep fast, like always. His breath steady, one arm draped across my side of the bed. I lay there in the dark, eyes open, listening to the wind against the windows. And thinking about that smile. I didn't say a word. But inside, something snapped clean. I didn't hear the doorbell the first time. I was in the study, surrounded by sympathy cards and half-signed thank you notes, a mug of lukewarm tea forgotten beside me. The kind of silence grief carves out, not empty but dense, had settled over everything. Then came the second ring, followed by the sound of Michael's voice downstairs. Muffled, too upbeat. By the time I made it to the landing, she was already inside. Catherine Rowe. In a camel coat that probably cost more than our kitchen appliances, holding a gold-ribboned box in one hand and a stack of glossy real estate flyers in the other. I brought truffles, she said, kissing the air beside my cheek. Imported. You must be so tired. You look thin. I managed a nod. Thin. Not grieving. Not exhausted. Not buried under paperwork and silence. Just thin. Michael trailed behind her, offering a helpless half-smile as if to say. She insisted. I stepped aside. Not an invitation, just a courtesy. The rain had softened outside, but the air still clung to her coat, fragrant with something expensive and powdery. She made a slow circle of the foyer. Still the same crown molding, she murmured, running a finger along the trim. Frank never did like change. No mention of the funeral. No, I'm sorry for your loss. Just chocolate and comparisons. She drifted toward the fireplace where I'd left my father's photo, black and white sharpsuit, faint smile. Her lips tightened just slightly. You were his whole world, she said. It should have sounded tender. But her tone was a shade too smooth, the kind that skims past warmth and lands on performance. Michael cleared his throat. Mom wanted to talk about options. Options, I repeated. Catherine smiled. It's not about the money, darling. It's about legacy. Continuity. I know Frank left you everything, and well, that's generous. She said generous like it was a mistake. I thought it might make sense. She continued, unfolding the flyers to consider some smart reinvestments. There's a high-rise in Bellevue. She slid a brochure toward me. Luxury condos, skyline views. Your guest wing is underused, she added lightly. You could lease it to a private therapist or remodel it for entertaining. I'd be happy to help. I looked at her hands, perfectly manicured, glossy pale pink, the kind that never handled grief. Only transactions. Catherine, I said carefully. This isn't a good time. Oh, of course, she said, placing a hand over mine. But grieving doesn't mean you stop planning. Frank would have wanted you to be practical. That was always his way. That was always her way. Dad made decisions from instinct, from stubborn conviction. She made hers from a spreadsheet. She drifted upstairs without asking, still talking about color palettes, guest accommodations, and how her friends in Palm Springs had downsized beautifully. I followed a few paces behind. In the hallway, she paused in front of the room where I kept Dad's books, old ledgers, travel maps, monogrammed pens. She didn't ask what was inside, just said, this would make a lovely meditation room. Downstairs again, she poured herself a splash of wine without waiting. Michael stood awkwardly near the fireplace, silent, watching me. Not intervening, not defending, just watching. She settled on the arm of the couch and crossed her legs. A good wife, she said, eyes on me, ensures her husband's mother is comfortable. That's what marriage is, a shared obligation. I didn't blink. A good husband, I said quietly, doesn't offer what isn't his. The silence that followed was thick. Not dramatic, just final. She set the glass down without sipping. Well, she said, standing, you've always had a mind of your own. Frank admired that, I suppose. Michael walked her to the door without speaking. When he returned, I was still seated, staring at the brochures she'd left behind. She means well, he offered. I didn't answer. Because that wasn't true, and he knew it. That night, after he fell asleep still on his side like every night since the will, I slipped out of bed and went downstairs. I took my laptop from the drawer, logged into our shared account, and stared at the balance for a long while. Then, without telling anyone, I opened a new account. My name only. No announcement, no drama. Just preparation. A memory surfaced, one I hadn't thought of in years. I was 8. Mom had picked me up from ballet class late, hair wet from the raincoat clutched tight. We passed Catherine in the parking lot. She waved, cheerful, too cheerful. Later in the car, my mother said softly, "Watch the ones who smile as they take. They're the ones who count on you being too polite to stop them." I didn't forget that lesson. Not then. Not now. The office door was ajar. I always shut it, not just out of habit but out of muscle memory. My father's study had taught me that certain spaces earned their privacy. You don't leave a place of decisions open like a pantry. I pushed the door open. The scent of cedar and paper still lingered, but something else floated just beneath the faint stir of disturbance. My file drawer wasn't open. But it wasn't quite closed either. I stood there for a long moment, listening. Not outside the room but inside myself. The part that knows. I dropped to one knee. The lock hadn't been forced, but the drawer had clearly been tampered with. One folder was slightly crooked, and the order of tabs alphabetical always had been broken. My heart didn't race. It focused. I walked back upstairs, calm as ritual. Michael was in the den watching something loud and forgettable. "Did you open the office drawer?" I asked. He looked over his shoulder. "Number. Why? Did someone?" He paused. "Mom dropped off cookies this morning. She said she wanted to see the tree. The tree I hadn't even put up yet. She went into the study, she was just walking around. Thought you kept notepads in there." I didn't reply. I just turned and walked back downstairs. That night after he fell asleep right side, like always, I slipped into the office with a flash drive and a small bag I'd purchased weeks ago. At 9 a.m. the next morning, a tech consultant named Marcus arrived. He had warm eyes and said little, which I appreciated. By noon, I had a discreet camera installed above the hallway arch. Motion triggered. Cloud synced. Silent. While he worked, I packed every legal document I valued, birth certificates, will copies, shareholding records, into a fireproof safe I'd bought that morning. Heavy matte black, the kind that whispers, "I'm not afraid anymore." Michael came home early. Saw the box on the floor. "What's all this documents? Seems excessive." I didn't respond. "You're hoarding," he added. "This paranoia isn't healthy." I looked at him steady. "I'm not paranoid," I said. "I'm now prepared." He didn't answer. But I saw it. The flicker behind his eyes, not confusion, but calculation. Like a man who realizes the board has shifted. That night, I didn't cook dinner. I didn't offer updates. I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and watched the rain trace long lines down the railing. The next morning, I opened my laptop and did something small. Something precise. I edited my email signature. Deleted Jillian Rowe. Replaced it with 2 letters JR, a name without a man behind it. No explanation. No announcement. Just movement. Then I called Mr. Flanagan. "I need a folder," I said. "The kind that comes with a witness signature." He didn't ask questions. That's why I trust him. Later that day, I watched the archived footage. Catherine. In my study. Opening drawers like cabinets. Her fingers moved fast, practiced. She didn't look curious, she looked entitled. She paused longest on the envelope labeled inheritance. She didn't open it, but she smiled. A soft, satisfied smile. I didn't shut the laptop. I didn't cry. I just stood, walked to the safe, and slipped in something new. My trust. It belonged in there now, too. He brought me lilies. I've always hated lilies. The scent was too thick, the petals too stiff. They reminded me of hospital lobbies and old arguments. He held them up like an olive branch, wrapped in pale tissue. No card, no apology, just lilies. "Thought they might brighten the place," Michael said. I smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't rise to your eyes. The house was already lit technically, twinkle lights along the banister. Fake garlands over the fireplace. I'd strung them out of obligation, like brushing your teeth while grieving. Routine, not celebration. He cooked too. Chicken marsala. The only dish he knew I liked, though I'd stopped craving it 3 winters ago. "This one's for you," he said, pouring the wine like he'd rehearsed the line. I ate quietly. He talked. About nothing. Weather. News. His mother's knees. He laughed too much, like sound could fix things, but I noticed no questions about my day. No mention of the safe he now couldn't open. Later I returned to my study. The air felt disturbed. I sat down at my desk and tapped the spacebar. My laptop blinked to life. The camera light on. 2 failed login attempts. I didn't gasp. I simply reached under the desk, pulled out the drive, and slid it into my back pocket. By the time I climbed into bed, Michael was already snoring. One arm draped dramatically across the pillow like a man sleeping peacefully through a storm he swore never came. I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and thought about Dad's words. When a man changes tone mid-fight, he's not sorry, he's recalculating. The next morning I found an email from the private investigator. Secure channel. No subject line. Just 3 attachments. One was a scanned loan application. Catherine's name on the applicant line. Jillian Rowe listed without consent under future assets pledged. Inheritance value estimated at $11 million. Collateral anticipated estate distributions. My jaw didn't clench. My fingers didn't twitch. I just stared. The second file was a photo Catherine at a private banker's office. Laughing. Holding a pen. The third was a time-stamped video clip. My home's hallway. Her heels, her handbag. Her practiced confidence. She never once looked up at the camera I'd installed. She assumed no one was watching. But someone was. I stood up. Crossed to the drawer. Pulled out the flash drive, the one I'd been saving. Not for protection. For proof. Beside it sat the folder. Cream-colored, crisp. Inside, the divorce packet. Filled out, organized, clipped. Signature line still blank. Not fear. Not readiness. Just waiting. I took the drive, slipped it into a thin black case. Closed the folder. I texted Michael. Let's get coffee. Just you and me. Tomorrow morning. Before bed, I found the old wooden box in my closet. Opened it. Took out my father's watch. It still worked. I wound it. Listened to the tick. It was steady, so was I. He wore a soft blue sweater and his old cologne. The one he used to save for anniversaries. It clung to the air like a rehearsed line. If he was dressing for reconciliation, he'd misread the part. It looked more like a eulogy. I arrived 10 minutes early. Saturday at the corner table where sunlight split across the floor in narrow bands. Ordered black coffee. No sugar, no mask. When he walked in, he smiled like we were on our 3rd date, not 15 years and 1 broken house later. You look great, he said, brushing his hand across the back of my chair before sitting. I nodded once. Didn't answer. The jazz overhead hummed politely. So did the couples around us, business meetings, morning flings, 2 lawyers talking shop. It was the perfect place for facts to land without echo. Michael leaned in, clasped his hands, and launched into small talk. Weather. A documentary he watched. His mother surprised that we were meeting alone. I didn't smile. Didn't nod. Didn't offer warmth. When his voice paused long enough to breathe, I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. Clean. Cream-colored. No logo. I placed it gently on the table between us. He looked at it. Then at me. Laughed once soft. What's this? The line, I said. He didn't touch it, didn't blink. Just let his fingers hover over the edge like a man afraid of paper cuts. Inside, divorce papers. Pre-drafted. Legally fortified. No loopholes. Then came the second item. A flash drive in a black sleeve. I laid it next to the envelope. That's not just surveillance, I said. It's intent. Collateral misuse. Unauthorized access. And audio. He tilted his head. Still smiling. But it was cracked now, a glaze starting to melt. You planned this? He asked, voice tight. I stirred my coffee once. Let the spoon rest. No, I said quietly. You trained me for this. He exhaled like a man just told the test had already started and he'd brought the wrong answers. I looked at him fully for the first time. The man I married, the man I no longer mistook for safe. You have until January 3rd, I added. To move your things. I'll be away until then. Michael didn't speak. Didn't move. Only watched. I reached for my coat. Slipped one arm and then the other. Smooth, without hurry. This, I said, standing, is me drawing the line. I left the lilies on the table. Still wrapped, still unwanted. Already wilting. Then I walked out, not triumphant, not broken. Just clear. The knock was soft, almost shy. When I opened the door, Dana was standing under a gray sky holding a paper bag in one hand and a smile that looked like it had taken effort. "Still like that chamomile vanilla blend?" she asked, lifting the bag. I stepped aside and nodded. I didn't stop liking it, just stopped remembering to buy it. We settled in the kitchen, smaller than the one in the old house, but quieter. Dana looked around the apartment like she was memorizing the walls. "Looks like you've finally let the light in." I shrugged. It came through on its own. I just stopped fighting it. While the kettle warmed, she told me about her new consulting role, part-time, remote, manageable. Then, like it was nothing. "We're launching a program. Financial literacy for women post-divorce. Mostly webinars and live Q&As. I told them if we could get you on board, people would actually listen." I didn't answer right away. I stirred honey into my tea, let the silence stretch, then asked, "You think I'm ready to teach anyone anything?" Dana leaned back. "Number, I think you already have. Just didn't charge for it." I remembered a time at the old firm, a junior client, newly widowed, almost tricked into signing over her insurance. I'd caught the clause called the broker out, made an enemy that day. But I'd also seen that woman cry in relief. Dana must have seen it in my face. We need women who don't flinch around power. Who don't say "I'm sorry" before asking a question. I looked down at my hands folded around the mug. "I can write the modules. I'm not sure I want to speak." Dana smiled. "Write first. Speak when you're ready." That night after Dana left, I found the photo. It wasn't framed, just tucked inside the back of an old book on maritime law. Dad's favorite. He'd scribbled notes in the margins like he was arguing with the author. I slid the photo out. His smile was uneven mid-laugh. The kind of smile you only get when someone catches you off guard or proud. Maybe both. He was standing in front of the old warehouse before it became Row Meridian. Before any of it meant money. I set the picture down on the side table, lit a candle, unscented, steady. Then I sat beside it with my ledger. Not the business one. The personal one. A thin black notebook I'd started the night I moved out. Each page had 2 columns, what I gave and what it cost. Not in dollars. In pieces of myself. The years I spent smoothing over Michael's rough edges in front of clients. The nights I excused Catherine's comments as just her way. The times I said nothing when silence was interpreted as approval. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I just drew a final line on the last page, and wrote under what I gained my name back. Then I closed the notebook and blew out the candle. But the scent of wax and memory lingered in the room. The doorbell rang at 9:07. I'd forgotten anyone was coming. But the calendar said otherwise, a small note in neat font. Initial consult, Deirdre G. I walked to the door without hurry. No panic, no reflex smile. Just the weight of knowing whoever stood on the other side wasn't here to take. Not this time. She was young. Maybe mid-30s. Nervous but not unsure. She held a folder to her chest the way I once clutched a balance sheet in a room full of older men. Respectfully, carefully. Like she knew what was inside could shift her life if only someone read it properly. "Miss Rowe?" she asked. I paused for half a beat. "Just JR now," I replied. "Come in." We sat at the small round table by the window. The view stretched over Puget Sound, flat water, low clouds, no noise. I let the silence settle first. She looked around. Noted the minimalism, the calm, the lack of a man's coat on any hook. "I saw your website," she said, opening the folder. And I read the line. Clarity, quiet. Control. She smiled softly. "That's what I need." I didn't ask why. I didn't need the messy story. What I needed and what I now offered was structure. Boundaries. Safe footing. We talked. I listened more than I spoke. And when she left, she shook my hand twice, once for the business. Once for the silent thing. We both understood. You don't walk out of the fire without the smell of smoke, but you do walk out. That evening I updated the website. No fanfare, just a new tagline beneath the logo: clarity. Quiet, control. For women who rebuild. Then I turned off the lamp. Not because it was dark, but because it was finally quiet. I didn't need applause when I walked away. Just silence. And the knowledge that this time I was the one holding the pen. Sometimes it's not the betrayal that breaks you, it's what you allow afterward. And when you finally stop explaining yourself, you make space for something steadier, clarity, dignity, and peace. In life, power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just closes a door gently and for good. If this story reminded you of someone you know, or a truth you've lived quietly, feel free to share your thoughts. I'll be here listening.